A pleasure to me all at last, and welcome once again to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again. So, here on a Wednesday, who would have thought that a day of marriage would pretty much come around with the third film in the Sharknado series? Well, Sharknado 3, otherwise known as Sharknado 3, oh hell no, was basically something that we did not truly expect. Because rather than it being something around California and New York, we're now right at the very epicenter of the United States, Washington, D.C. At least that's how it truly begins. Because after all, Finn Shepard does give himself quite a big surprise. A prestigious Medal of Honor from the President, Mark Cuban. Yeah, that's right, Mark Cuban probably is the President. There was, believe it or not, even speculation of him running in 2020. But that certainly hadn't happened. It kind of would have been cool if that were the case, though. Too bad it wasn't Barack Obama who actually played the president, because that's exactly what he was at the time. Anyways, though, even when Finn does receive his little award from the president, he's actually met by a lot of faces, including an obsessed fan of his, whom goes for a surprised selfie with him, even thankfully asking permission to upload it to the internet, in which that it is granted to him. But after all that comes around and all the rewards that Finn gets as honoraries for his actions in California and New York, it's apparently still not enough. Not to mention, being back with April after that little time they had away from each other in the likes of Beverly Hills and elsewhere, even on the faces of disaster, coming and going twice now. Finn Shepard apparently still is a bit unsatisfied. It likely has something to do with the loss of life he's had over the years. Boz, George, Ben, and some people he's known pretty well too. Even Sky had unfortunately succumbed to the likes of the Sharknado epidemic in both cases. But little does he realize that in Washington, D.C., he's still not safe from all this. A third storm breaks out. It busts through the White House and the Pentagon in such areas of Washington, D.C. And with everything that had come around, you would think that Finn would catch a break. Same with April and every other member of the family that's still around. But boy, we ought to start talking a little bit more about Finn's family. This movie does tend to focus a little more on Finn's family, but we don't quite get much out of April's side of the family, at least not for the moment. But in any case though, when things really do start to take a turn for the worst, when they escape Washington, D.C., with Finn getting himself a rental car, which is a brand new Toyota, and April manages to make her way out as well, they eventually agree to meet up with the rest of the family, whom is situated at Universal Studios. That's right. We have a movie that takes place in freaking Universal. And considering the fact that I was literally just there over a month ago, it really does make me look on these films even more so than I could have ever possibly imagined. But oh boy, we ought to start talking a bit more about some of the other characters. Because when Finn does start to encounter trouble, he actually does get help from nearby Samaritan, who is, believe it or not, Cassandra Serbo. Yep, Nova Clark once again emerges. Yeah, how she didn't come around in the second film is still a bit of a mystery. But you know what? A good excuse to bring back Nova Clark, whom herself is real bad to the bone. I mean, her efforts against the first Sharknadoes in the first film were definitely, hands down, top notch. But Finn was definitely the true hero there. Still, Cassandra Serbo still does play up a nice work when it comes to the character Nova Clark herself. She still does play up a nice set of different benefactors, which do help to enable Finn and the other characters to essentially move along with the plot while figuring out a way to truly take down the threats at hand. And boy, she is armed to the teeth. she has herself an assistant now and a giant RV, which is packed full of awesome. I mean, this RV is basically her home base now. It is essentially a Sharknado module. Literally, the entire interior is straight out of the military. At least, that's how it seems to be, at least. And Nova, Finn, and the assistant, they all make their way via this RV, a Sharknado vehicle itself, which didn't really have itself a cool name, but I kind of wish it did. Otherwise, it could have been on par with the likes of Herbie, Kit, Ecto-1, the DeLorean from Back to the Future, and even Elvis's pink Cadillac. It could have been a celebrity car in its own way, RV in this case. But even when all the plans do come together, we do get to see April meet up with her mother May, discussing about what the grandchild should be. Maybe it could be named June, since after all, April is expecting another child in the family. Yeah. And being that this is one of the only times we get to see April's side of the family thus far, like I said, this movie does happen to shift more towards the likes of Finn's family rather than it being about April's family, but it still does a pretty good job at giving us both directions, either way you look at it. And while Sharknado 3 doesn't entirely live up to many expectations that we were holding on to, being that it has a certain sense of monotony to it, but the usages of newer locations rather than it being rehashed in certain older locations like California and New York still do play up a nice level of creativity and also offer a good sense of variety. Because in all these films, we're set upon in different spots of the world. At least with The Nation being the first, up until part 4 at least, where it starts to go more towards outside of the United States. Anyways though, with the third film though, we have Washington DC, and we've got Uni-freaking-versal, Orlando. So, that's two big locations, coming from two different parts of the states, and this basically is only close to the halfway point of the film. Basically, there is another child, another large part of the Finn family, the Shepherd end of the family at least. They're all having themselves a good vacation out there in Universal, and with May being there for April every step of the way until the child is due to be birthed. Well, time could only tell exactly how would the child turn out in the end. Things quickly get serious though when the Hollywood Rip Ride rocket is in action. Because after all, when Claudia does get on there, along with her friends, she has to leave her phone behind because it's one of those attractions where it can end up flying out if unsecured. So that's basically what had to be done. And even today, these kind of lockers are still commonplace on rides that can be inverted or at times can just be so intense that inside pocketed items like cards, keys, phones, etc. can all be flung out if you're not careful. And so that's basically just how it was. Even in my most recent trip in Universal and other such places like this, they still are of commonplace. But in all seriousness though, when Finn does make it up to the top after the coaster itself stalls and everybody is forced to evac, as the storms roll in with the Sharknadoes coming around, Finn unfortunately gets himself accidentally strapped into the coaster and is sent flying through the ride itself. It goes into the bank curved, which is damaged, the train flies off of it and lands right into Twister Ride It Out, which as we know is nowadays home to the likes of Despicable Me, Minion Mayhem, as well as The Tonight Show at Jimmy Fallon, the ride. And so, the Twister Ride It Out attraction does become a bit of a star-studded event as Finn is right there at the epicenter. Sharks roll in, the fake tornado rolls towards the nearby crowd of people whom are inside the ride, and well, it's a rare occasion to see something like that actually happen. And if only something like that would actually happen where Bill Paxton was inside the ride itself as a special guest, that would have been pretty awesome. But sadly, that probably never will happen. Because in both cases, Bill Paxton's gone and Twister itself is closed to make way from the two mentionedly rides that I had previously mentioned, well, it could only be done basically probably in defunct land by this time. Anyways though, they evac the ride itself, they evac the park itself, and the Universal Globe starts to become itself its own major problem. That's when they eventually turn their eyes towards a certain member of the Shepard family himself, Grandpa Shepard. Yep. He himself was a well-known member of the United States space program, working at Cape Canaveral, and it also had some military influence as well. So of course, with Gilbert Grayson Shepard by the sides, well, David Hasselhoff himself plays up a nice role of being a Grandpa Shepard himself. But still, it does make you wonder, what could they possibly do to stop this new threat? Well, they must take to the stars. That's right. A space shuttle is primed, ready for launch, and supposedly it wasn't meant to be, but it must be done now, as Gilbert advises the crew that this new ship should be in usage for the purpose of conquering this new Sharknado threat in the state of Florida, for Orlando, for Cape Canaveral, for anything that the Shepard family must do to eradicate this threat once and for all. And so, that's what they go ahead and do. They get themselves aboard with the likes of April, Finn, and Gilbert inside the cockpit and in space uniforms, all ready to go. After some much needed prep work and planning, the three are ready for launch. But unfortunately, the storms strike again. The Sharknadoes start to contaminate the air to the point where launches are not fully cleared, and the shuttle would basically just be grounded for the time being, leaving the others to eventually improvise and start shooting their way through the storms in order to clear a path for the shuttle to launch, which they're eventually successful in doing so, and the shuttle starts to fly. And when it reaches the upper atmosphere, all the parts of the shuttle are broken off, including the fuel tank and tertiary rockets on the sides. It's just the shuttle, the storms, which they can see well above and beyond from the viewpoint of the ship itself. And now, the plans are to be enacted. They plan on utilizing a nearby satellite, which apparently will have the power to neutralize the storms with a powerful heat ray from above. This satellite was apparently meant in a way to stir up storms and create temperature influences, but this satellite is now specifically being used to shoot down a storm from well above the atmosphere. And when they do so, they go beyond their lengths to hit that storm with that laser. But even when they do make it out of there alive, unfortunately, Gilbert ends up separated from the group, and he is forced to live out the rest of his time outside planet Earth, eventually landing on the moon, which has been dubbed Luna for some time. As for April and Finn, even when they manage to make it through, the shuttle itself does get destroyed by the nearby sharks, as they're flung up to beyond the stratosphere, and they collide with the ship, causing it to be damaged. Finn, unfortunately, ends up losing April again. Another shark gobbles her down, and Finn himself even does become his own harbinger aboard the inside of another shark. So 3 times now he's had to basically live his time inside of a shark. And so I guess you could say he's gone beyond the point where he and April have been eaten by so many sharks, it's probably not even funny anymore. But apparently it still does hold up against re-entry speeds, burning up of the shark's body itself. They crash land onto a nearby beach. Finn himself manages to escape the burning corpse, and even April is fished out of there once again. And believe it or not, the baby itself apparently is out as well. So who would have thought? a mother giving birth to a baby while inside a shark. That's basically a double whammy right there. So, not only a way to rack up a certain happy ending, but in addition to that, as a special memory and a token of honor to the great Gilbert Grayson Shepard himself, the baby is simply given the name Gil Shepard. And so, that concludes another point in the series. Well, except for the fact that another shark comes out of nowhere and crushes April. Yep. The mother, whom had just given birth, is now dead. Yeah. That's quite a way to end a third film. So, I feel like that, in all seriousness, score-wise, there's a lot of mixed pieces here and there. There's race cars, jets, shuttles, Universal, NASCAR, sharks, tornadoes, the likes of Ian Ziering and Tara Reid, as well as the likes of Mark Cuban and even David Hasselhoff. You definitely have yourself a good share of special guests aboard this film, much like with the other two films. But the way I see it, that ending especially, where the birth of Gil Shepard, the name especially given in honor of Gilbert Grayson Shepard himself, was a special touch, but they definitely ruined it by allowing another shark to come right onto April's body and just crush her, supposedly killing her. Yet, we pretty much jumped the shark. Because apparently, in part 4, things are done a little bit differently than we would have suspected. It's apparently not over for April. Nope. They somehow found a way to bring her around again. But I will talk more about Sharknado 4, The Fourth Awakens, tomorrow. So, overall, my experiences with Sharknado 3 were well impressed. But how I see it today, in comparison to the other two films, it doesn't necessarily do that much better than the likes of the second film. So, especially given the ending, it unfortunately brings the score down to a reasonable enough 8.5 out of 10.1. So, a bit of an improvement over the first one, but not enough to even compete with the second. And so, like I said, tomorrow, Sharknado The Fourth Awakens will be my next stop in the Sharknado series. And so, I will see you guys again with more of this stuff coming soon.
I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.